Hi everyone, I'm adding this on to the front of the videos that I just made earlier today outside, and because I wanted to say one additional thing, I'm going to say it up front because it's relevant to all that follows. But recently I was fortunate enough to meet a mental health worker in Britain who started a new program that you guys might check out. It's related to the spiritual crisis work, and it's called Emerging Proud. She's starting a group. She works in the National Health Service in Britain, and from the premise that many people in institutions or on various kinds of drugs to treat mental illness actually have ended up that way in that situation while having a spiritual crisis, and the point being that what is a spiritual awakening is seen by the mental health industry as being a mental illness, and so this person is doing this work within the system to try and change the perception, and and she cites much research that shows that if you can get some of these people before they really get into the system and provide them a framework for their experience, then they start to get healthy. They need, the problem with having a spiritual awakening is that they don't have a framework to hold that experience in. It's right out of their usual worldview, their usual box. And so there's this chasm, this gap that opens between their ordinary life and then their sort of spiritual life. And ordinary society and institutions treat them like they're going slightly crazy. You all may have experienced some of that, I don't know. But I know that many of you are careful about what you say in certain circles and around certain people. But so in this case, one of the reasons I'm sharing it is that it really matters what you think. In other words, your worldview, a person's worldview, really matters. If your worldview cannot accommodate a spiritual experience, then and you start to have them, then you need a shift in worldview. And that's what this particular person, Katie Mottram is her name, and so she's trying to give them that framework, and then they can be sort of led to a mindset that it can incorporate all of their experience. So, I mean, what we've been doing in this course is looking at worldviews, and I think that is a sort of demonstration that our societal worldview does not accommodate spiritual awakening and spiritual experiences. Our societal, and that includes, by the way, in her view, even those who are Christians. It doesn't really work even for them. So our societal worldview has this effect that it really limits what a person can accommodate and causes great trouble if their experience expands beyond the limited boundaries of what is considered by society to be normal. And so here we are in this course. We've been exploring worldviews throughout, and this particular week coming up is working on mystical experience. Last week we looked at mystical cosmologies from world religions, and so these kinds of things would I think be part of a shift in a worldview. One would generate a different worldview from studying these kinds of things, and hopefully we're going to end up at this course with a worldview that incorporates all of this, having looked at the background of our world from all these different angles. All right, so now we're on to the videos that I recorded earlier. Okay, bye. Hi everyone.
may be too windy out here, I don't know. We'll have to see how the sounds after I finish this recording. Anyway, hope you're all doing really well. Spring has finally really arrived here in Sedona. So it's getting green and blossoms and flowers out here. I think it's going to be a lot of wildflowers soon. I'm looking forward to that. Anyway, so we're really getting into some great territory now, I feel like. Having considered that all roads lead to mystery eventually, even the road of science, which one might think doesn't lead to mystery. It's something that answers questions, but its mode of answering those questions inevitably leads you to more mystery. A, it leads to more questions, and B, there are things, aspects of things that are answered. There are aspects of reality that remain completely untouched or unanswered. And so this week we're really sort of entering into those areas that remain pristine. Science really has nothing to say. It doesn't touch them. But all of the history of science and everything that science has done says nothing, absolutely nothing about mystical experience. I mean, we can try to treat mystical experience as though it's merely chemicals happening in the brain, and so that would be one way to explain it away, mystical experience away. But given that all we have is experience ultimately, so the entire world of everything is really experience, then that's not a really good approach and a good solution. We're either in the position of treating mystical experience as though it's an artifact and not really real, or if we treat it seriously, then we have to go into a much deeper inquiry, and that there are dimensions of consciousness that this material approach doesn't touch at all. And last week we looked at the religious cosmologies, the mystical cosmologies, all of which suggest that a different model of creation, a very different model of creation, that creation is top down, not bottom up. In other words, what lies behind this universe, what lies behind all of this is not subatomic particles and the laws of nature, but divinity, or a ground of being, a conscious ground of being, some other kind of nature that has given rise to this world. This world has come out, it's emanated from a sort of a primal source of one consciousness, a source that is more like consciousness than it is like matter, and so more like spirit than it is like matter. So this is the other side of the coin from the materialist viewpoint, the scientist material viewpoint, and it's really why religion and science has a hard time going together. These two very different. They believe something fundamentally different about reality. What's fundamental? What's behind reality? What underlies it? They're completely at odds on that. They're looking at it from completely different directions. So it's important to have brought this out, this distinction, and we as a society have gone from the top-down view to the bottom-up view, and that's a huge transition that every other culture and society has had throughout history. That behind all of this is the divine. Behind all of this is there's a ground of being that we all participate in via our consciousness, that we can contact God, and that this is what this world is based on, comes from. We've turned that around to say, no, it just comes out of matter, this stuff. It comes out of this. We're animated dirt, and that kind of thing. So we've gone from a society that really had a creation story and a worldview that situated us in a very different universe, a very different setting than we really believe now. And even if one is religious now, one still is sort of faced with a sort of conundrum around this vastly different belief structures. So this week we go into the mystical experience. I'll talk about that in a second. And what the characteristic of a mystical experience are, what those characteristics are, and how they occur, what the characteristics, and what they might mean. And you know, mystical experience is very clear from the readings this week and in the past, have degrees. There's degrees of mystical experience, and all the way to what you might call a full non-dual experience, when one experiences unity with God, oneself is the universe. There's no distinction between you and anything else. The full mystical experience. But there's many grades of mystical experience, and one might say that one characteristic could be a kind of an ascent towards the full mystical experience. I don't like to think of it that way personally, but many do, such that, you know, the further one ascends towards full unity, the less the divine is hidden. So the divine is most hidden here in this world, in this ordinary consciousness. You might call it the material consciousness. But as one ascends in sort of spiritual consciousness, when consciousness expands, the divine becomes less and less hidden, and one sees it more and more even in this world. In fact, in Jewish mysticism, there's this beautiful phrase called "raising the sparks," which is there's a Jewish term which I can't remember, but it's like our job actually is to see the divine in this world, because in doing that we are raising this world, we're helping raise this world back up towards the divine. Raising the sparks are the sparks of the original creation that are sort of buried in this world, in all of matter. The more we see the sparks in this world, the more we raise them up into our consciousness as divine, the more that this world is elevated. And so our job as humans is to elevate this world. Beautiful. That's a beautiful perspective, I feel like. So, but underlying all of this, I think, is another distinction, which is that, you know, following Descartes, which led us into the scientific revolution, all of our knowledge, all of our knowing became mediated. I can only know this object via my senses. And so hence the conclusion that I can never actually really directly know this object, and I have to study things about it. I measure its size and its weight and anything I can measure about it to know this object. But that's all mediated. It's all kind of second-hand. And in mystical experience, one enters a realm of knowing that is not mediated, that is direct. And this is missing from all of Western philosophy, basically, as far as I can tell. This idea that one can know directly there's a direct connection, and it's really knowing via the inside, knowing via the inner, not knowing via this sort of mediated outer via the senses. In other words, I mean, I have a direct experience of the consciousness of this world, In many ways, I could consider that I might have a direct experience of the inner element of this rock, this object. I mean, not theoretically, but there's the possibility that that could happen. And in that case, that would be unmediated knowing. But in any case, the unmediated knowing extends to our contact with the spirit, with the divine. It's unmediated. It's not via the senses. It's via our own consciousness. And so that's a very different kind of knowing, not considered by science, yet considered by all of the mystical traditions. And not just that, considered via indigenous spirituality and other forms of spirituality. So this is the whole realm that is missing from any kind of scientific study. It's not amenable to scientific study. We could study things about it, but that experience itself is only available via experience itself. One has to experience that direct knowing. There's no other way to do it. So we talk about it, then we're already into a mediated form of knowing about it, which is not it. So in the mystical it really represents another form of knowing, but in some ways a more fundamental form of knowing. And in my view, it's a form of knowing upon which all other forms of knowing are based, even though we're not conscious of it. So, and this is the realm I'm not going to be able to express it well or represent it well. But this mystical knowing, this direct form of knowing, available to humans and presumably all creatures, is obviously more fundamental. It's direct. It's more fundamental. It doesn't require language. Well, we can put what we experience into language, but the experience itself is not in the realm of language. So, so it doesn't take long before you start to think of this as being a more fundamental form of knowing, the kind of knowing upon which the universe might actually be based, and upon which we've imposed a structure of another kind of knowing, a secondary kind of knowing, mediated form of knowing. So, so the question, and I meant to bring some quotes out, and maybe I'll just send the quotes to you, but there's many quotes, a couple of well-known ones from the Tao Te Ching, and there's one from St. Augustine, which goes, in order to know God, it is best not to know him. And there's a quote from the Upanishads about he or she who knows doesn't know. He or she who doesn't know knows. It is known by not knowing it. It is not known by knowing it. These kinds of things, these kinds of quotes coming from the great literature, world's wisdom traditions literature, tell us that the kind of knowing, the mystical kind of knowing, is a not knowing, is facilitated by a sort of not knowing, at least in the ordinary sense of knowing. So the question I throw out this question to you this week is, what do you know when you don't know? When you really don't know? In the space of not knowing, what do you know? And that's a little koan for you this week, and hopefully that will stimulate the reading and the discussion. And if I think of anything else, I'll make another short video. Okay, talk to you soon.